My deep appreciation of theater history was instilled in me by Tom Empey, a college mentor to me and hundreds, if not thousands of others. While teaching Greek theater terms, he would grab the fabric of his slacks and say,
"You see these pants? Euripides, Eumenides,"
making light of content that could be considered rather dry and stuffy while still maintaining respect for the art, which is what I want to do with this podcast. For each episode, I invite a guest from the many paths my theater career has taken me down. I give my guests no idea what we'll be talking about, but they know we're going to find an outrageous story about theater history and perhaps get a better understanding about why we're still doing it after all these years. So, welcome to Euripides Eumenides, and I am your host, Aaron Odom.
Apocalypse, I said, why you want to show up now? Just when the heart of my life was getting good. I'll give you one more chance. Walk on out of the door, yeah. Get your ass to getting where the getting is good.
Good morrow, Eumenidites. This is Aaron Odom from Trident Theater, bringing you another episode of Euripides Eumenides, a theater history podcast. This episode is pretty special. If you're a regular listener, then you know that I've been sought out several times by scholarly writers who have written a book on a particular topic of theater history and would like to promote it on this show. I'm all for that because there is some old adage about history in general, not just theater history, and I'm obviously paraphrasing here, but it's the one who writes history who gets to determine the future reader's perspective of history. Now, this suggests that perhaps something might have been left out or told in a way to favor certain people or events, rather than giving just the facts, ma'am. So I hope at least somewhere along the way, this podcast has inspired you to see certain aspects of theater in a new light, which does nothing more than enhance the perspective you already have, and maybe question some things you think you already know. Man, sounded a little too much like Socrates from the clouds. And if you didn't know, that's a callback to a prior episode. Go back and look that one up. But for this episode, my guest is Dr. Darren Freebury-Jones. Darren is a scholar, playwright, lecturer, and author who specializes in Shakespearean studies. More specifically, Darren specializes in Shakespeare's contemporary playwrights and other theater makers, and even more specifically, in the authors who inspired Shakespeare. Things like this are of a very particular interest to me. For example, when I'm getting into a new musician, I often think things like, oh, we couldn't have had this without Busta Rhymes, or, oh, we couldn't have this piece of work without somebody like Paula Vogel, or, something like that. So Darren's most recent book is titled Shakespeare's Borrowed Feathers, and you can get it now wherever books are sold, but I have a couple preferred places in the show notes. But for this episode, Darren flipped the format on me again, as other authors who have been on this show have done in the past. Darren shares the lives and works of three of many dramatists detailed in his book, and there's a lot more than just what we talk about today. So I'd highly recommend getting your copy of Shakespeare's Borrowed Feathers by Dr. Darren Freebury-Jones. That's a hyphenated last name. And to entice you even more, here's my conversation with Darren in Season 2, Episode 3, Shakespeare's Borrowed Feathers. Darren, I feel incredibly fortunate to have you on the program today. Just from what I've been reading, you have been keeping so busy with doing a number of different podcasts, getting out there, promoting your books, lecturing, your lecture specifically in Stratford-upon-Avon, right?
That's right, yes.
Amazing. And you've got these great books that... based on what I've heard from what you've been talking about on the podcast that I've heard you on, there is a particular breadth of knowledge that honestly, like people like me, I think are a little timid to approach.
Oh, really? I don't bite.
No.
Hard.
Well, I think there's two sides of that coin. There's the people who are like, geez, this is really, really dense stuff. And then there are people who will go in full bore with a machete and a red pen, and they're ready to tell you where you're wrong.
Yes, that's not me. I promise.
Good.
I promise.
Good. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, Darren, how did you get involved with, pouring into the world of Elizabethan and Jacobean England?
Yes, well, it's a pretty big question. It's hard to pinpoint, really. I remember falling in love with Shakespeare at high school,
Mhm.
studying Julius Caesar, and then doing what are known as your A levels here in the United Kingdom. And I studied King Lear, which for a 16, 17-year-old, pretty massive text, that arguably
Oh my God.
Shakespeare's bleakest play, King Lear. Themes of age and grief.
Please, 16-year-old, fully understand what an 80-year-old is going through at the end of his life and dividing his wealth and kingdom.
But my goodness, it's so huge, and every time I reread it or see it in performance or in film or listen to a radio adaptation, it just raises new questions for me. And I think it was King Lear was the play that really got me to fall in love with Shakespeare. So I went on to do English literature at Cardiff University in Wales, where I'm from, and ended up doing an MA on the Shakespeare Apocrypha. So looking at plays that have been attributed to Shakespeare. And what I enjoyed about doing that MA dissertation was learning about other writers. And as a huge Shakespeare fan with the nickname Shakespeare Boy throughout college and university, it was just a joy to encounter these other electrifying playwrights who were on the scene during the period. And I think that's how I fell into, I guess, trying to develop that breadth of knowledge you were talking about, Aaron, with Elizabethan and Jacobean drama, and just get a real sense of the theatrical milieu of those periods.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the podcasts I heard you on, the host was asking you about how you felt about Shakespeare in love, and
Yes.
I know that in the theater world, that's actually a fairly contentious topic, which is funny to
really?
me. I'm like, just come on, even if it is just a story, just enjoy it. It's a silly, fun story, and you do get some really excellent history from it, even if it's kind of tongue in cheek. I think my favorite is John Webster being the boy who sits outside and talks about how much he what does he say? He's like enjoys the bloody bits.
I like the blood. Yes. I've done a couple of interviews in recent times on Shakespeare in Love, and I think it's good fun. Suspend your disbelief. It's not trying to be historically accurate, but I also think it's quite a good introduction to getting an understanding and depiction of Shakespeare as a practical man of the theatre. And that's very much how I see him.
Right.
For me, it's very important that he was an actor, dramatist.
Yeah.
And maybe that's in part subjectively because of my own background in acting. I've always loved treading the boards. But I think that's really crucial for developing our knowledge on the evolution of Shakespeare's artistry, actually.
Right. Now, help me solve something, because you probably have an answer to this. It depends on who you read. It depends on what you read. But they will say, some scholars will say Shakespeare was not as celebrated in his time as he is today. Mm-hmm. That probably came about a few hundred years later. Mm-hmm. But, he was one of these first artists that had his works published. So, there's like a conflicting thing there of like, well, if he wasn't so popular in his time, but he was published, then how did he emerge as the one that came out and everybody knows his name now?
Yes. I've got a song in my head. I think it's the theme tune to Cheers, actually, where everybody knows your name. Yes.
And rest in peace, George Wendt. Oh my God, it just happened. Anyway.
I think for a bit of context, we can have a look at the reactions of when Shakespeare's star actor Richard Burbage died in 1619. So right. Richard Burbage would have played the likes of Hamlet, Macbeth, Othello, and so on. And the whole country was in mourning. And comparatively, Shakespeare's death wasn't mourned in quite as widespread a way. Shakespeare was certainly celebrated, and his works were collected into a folio edition in 1623 and printed in individual editions as well. But I think Shakespeare was recognized as one of several brilliant dramatists during the period, and it really was a golden age of theatre and literature. And when we think of the closure of the theatres during the Civil War and their reopening in 1660, what were the theatre managers reaching for in terms of plays? Well, they were reaching for Shakespeare, but they were also reaching for the likes of Ben Jonson. They were also reaching for the likes of John Fletcher. And I think one figure in particular had a huge impact on Shakespeare's cultural status as it stands today. And that was the theatre manager, David Garrick. Who was just an incredible talent, and a bit like Shakespeare and other early modern dramatists. I think Garrick recognized the opportunities for special effects on stage. So famously, he wore a hydraulic wig when playing the role of Hamlet. So when Hamlet encounters the ghost of his father, Garrick's hair quite literally stood on end like quills upon the fretful porcupine. And Garrick was responsible for the Shakespeare Jubilee, which very much made Stratford-upon-Avon the global centre of Shakespeare tourism. I think it would be more apt to call the Shakespeare Jubilee the Garrick Jubilee of 1769, actually, because it seemed as much a celebration of Garrick as it did Shakespeare, with not a line of Shakespeare uttered during the rain-drenched festival. And there's a statue I get to look at every time I'm in Stratford-upon-Avon above the town hall of Shakespeare that David Garrick donated to the town. And I have to say that the statue more closely resembles David Garrick than Shakespeare.
I was going to say, I've been trying to figure out, like, I'm trying to find the hook. Like, how can I do a singular David Garrick episode? And I'm like, oh my God, there's just so much. There's just so much. And
but I mean, in terms of British panto as well, it's thanks to David Garrick that British pantomime in the UK is a festive tradition, because he said, okay, it's very popular, and if you won't come and see my King Lear or my Hamlet, then I'll be putting on these pantomimes at my theatre, but only during the winter months. But I think Garrick, he's performing the plays of Shakespeare, but there's also Ben Jonson and John Fletcher, these younger contemporaries of Shakespeare's. Now, John Fletcher is recognized as a deeply collaborative dramatist. So during the period, whenever John Fletcher's mentioned, it's usually alongside Francis Beaumont, as if they were some kind of tag team, the Simon and Garfunkel or Rodgers and Hammerstein of their era. Whereas Shakespeare's canon is primarily sole-authored. Like every other commercial dramatist, he does co-author plays largely near the beginning and towards the end of his career. But I think Shakespeare is this, going along with this notion of him as this solitary genius. He's easier for the likes of Garrick to promote in that way. And Ben Jonson, very different playwrights to Shakespeare, all about your neoclassical dramaturgy, the unities of time, place, and action. And that gets associated with France. So for the likes of Garrick, I think Shakespeare seems more quintessentially British, and thereby becomes this huge British export. And so that would be my response to that question. But I mean, I could carry on just answering that question all day long, really, because there are a lot of avenues you could go down with why it is that Shakespeare is so celebrated today, and other playwrights of his era aren't so much.
So I just, on a whim, my kids are off doing their things in the house, and I'm like, well, okay, I might as well just watch a movie I haven't watched in a while. And I watched the first half hour before one of them came out and said, I'm really bored, do something with me. But about the first half hour of the early 90s Last of the Mohicans by Michael Mann. One of my I just love him as a director. And I think they almost overdid it with how accurate they tried to make everything in 1737. And one British officer he's come over for this first time, and he's heard a general negotiating with the colonials their terms of service in the militia, and he's very shocked by it, and the general is very, aloof, and, well, what are you going to do? These colonials are just difficult to handle. And the new officer says something like, I thought that the principle of the colonization was to make the world England.
Mm.
As you're talking about Garrick and trying to exemplify what was specifically British, I'm like, was there a MABA movement at that time? Make America British again? I don't know. But anyway, Darren, you've got this book, Shakespeare's Borrowed Feathers, that is currently circulating. It's your third book.
Yes.
And this is specifically about those authors that were around Shakespeare at the time. I mean, one of the ways I really like to think of it is this is just like when Sondheim and Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber were all getting really big in the 60s and 70s, but they were struggling. They were all fighting together. Stephen Schwartz is in there, and everybody's trying to say, please come see my thing. I've got a voice. Yes. I've got a unique voice. And that's what all these people were doing in their time in the late 1500s, early 1600s. So Darren is getting to flip the script on me here today. So Dr. Darren Freebury-Jones, educate me. Who have you got for me today?
Okay. But I love your point there about trying to get bums on seats or feet in the pits at the theatres, because that's something that I find really useful to stress, is that plays during Shakespeare's time, they're not seen as works of great art in quite the same way as poetry, like Shakespeare's sonnets were. That fundamentally these plays are designed to entertain and engage audiences. So there's a lot of collaboration. There's a lot of commercial rivalry. You've got rival playhouses, rival companies, rival dramatists, rival forms of entertainment. If you're a Londoner, you can go and see the bear baiting or public executions instead. Yeah.
I could watch dogs be ripped to shreds by bears.
Yeah, it's either that or Hamlet this afternoon.
Let's see, the Scottish play or a bard. I don't know, one of the two.
But in terms of thinking about rivalry in particular, my first author for you is Robert Greene. And I believe you've discussed Greene before.
Yes, I have. And actually, I wanted to ask you about that. I believe I discussed Greene on my Thomas Kidd episode. I can't remember where he used the term the upstart crow. Yes?
Yes, he did indeed.
And yes, let's hear about Robert Greene. I can't wait. This is fascinating.
Yes. So upstart crow, that's chiefly what he's known for today. And I think here in the UK, a lot of your more general folk on the streets, if you will, would recognize Greene as Shakespeare's pantomimic arch rival in Ben Outen's sitcom Upstart Crow. Are you familiar with the sitcom Upstart Crow, Aaron?
I have heard of it. I haven't seen it, but I have heard of it. Mm-hmm.
Oh, indulge. If you can get hold of it, it's an absolute joy. I thoroughly enjoy it. And a bit like your Shakespeare in Love, where it's a case of don't take it too seriously.
Right.
And I think academics probably more likely to recognize Greene through a rather notorious 1598 woodcut engraving of him, suited in death's livery.
Yes, I've heard of this.
He looks a bit like an ear of corn or a particularly pensive banana. Now, as I've mentioned, Greene probably most well known today for a 1592 pamphlet attributed to him called Greene's Groat's Worth of Wit, bought with a million of repentance. So this is a pamphlet that Greene ostensibly writes while on his deathbed. And at one point in this pamphlet, he's warning his fellow university educated playwrights. So we don't believe Shakespeare went to university, but we know that Robert Greene did. So he received a BA from St. John's College in Cambridge in 1580. He transferred to Clare Hall in Cambridge for his 1583 MA, and in 1588 he was granted an MA from Oxford University. So Greene is warning the likes of university-educated playwrights such as Christopher Marlowe, Thomas Nashe, and so on, against actors in particular, those puppets, I mean, that speak from our mouths, he said, those antics garnished in our colors, and one actor in particular.
Wow.
So the notorious passage goes like this: there is an upstart crow, beautified with our feathers, that with his tiger's heart wrapped in a player's hide, supposes he is as well able to bombast out a blank verse as the best of you. And being an absolute Johannes factotum, so a jack of all trades, is in his own conceit the only Shakespeare in a country. So I think in the book, Robert Greene is a great author to start with in my book, Shakespeare's Borrowed Feathers, because his feathers are evidently ruffled by this actor who's had the audacity, despite being a country boy, lacking a university education, to turn his hand to writing plays.
Well, you know, we never can trust an actor that says, what I really wanted to do is direct.
but I'm curious, you know, given your lived experiences, Aaron, what your thoughts are on the fact that Shakespeare is an actor turned playwright, or an actor as well as a dramatist. How do you think that might have influenced his dramatic writing?
Well, you know, I think of it this way. I've approached Shakespeare several times on this program, and you mentioned the fact that we aren't really certain if he went to university. What I understand is that he had to come home and settle his father's debts, right? So he started to get something of a formal education, but then came home, and he's on the street like everybody else. He's, you know, in settling father's debts. I'm imagining it is to wealthy and powerful people, or to people who could get you that kind of money really quickly in probably not the most legal ways. So this is my argument of why I think Shakespeare was more of a, you know, had a more broad perspective of what it truly meant to be British. He went through almost all of formal public education, and then had to quit. And then with a nearly adult acumen, had to be dragged down into, air quotes, the dregs of society. So he understood everybody. He understood how to talk to everybody. But coming from a place of I'm an actor and that made me a better director, I think of George Clooney on Broadway right now. In what is it, Good Night and Good Luck, a film that he wrote, directed, and everything. He was in it. He didn't play the lead role in that one, but he knows it. He knows it so well. Whereas we have a guy who came from being a bit player on a sitcom and rose pretty meteorically through the 90s and 2000s, he's a guy that now really understands how to tell a story and what makes a story compelling and provocative.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah. And I think it's worth emphasizing as well that Shakespeare's not really an anomaly in terms of being an actor turned playwright. When you have a look at some of the other great playwrights of the era, such as Ben Jonson, started off as an actor, although unlike Shakespeare, seems very keen to leave that profession as swiftly as possible. Thomas Hayward, Nathan Fields.
I'll tell you this. When I first was telling people when I was like 17 or 18, I think I'm going to go into acting, they'd start throwing out the stats at me. They're like, okay, tell me how many movie stars there are. What, 200? Maybe 200? You know how many of them are trying to get into that? And, you know, it wasn't until I was in LA and in it, I'm like, good God, Darren, every third person you'd meet was trying to get into the business somehow.
Yes, yeah.
And I mean, it's unquantifiable just how many people there were trying to get it. So for every Shakespeare, you have to consider that there's probably about 50 not Shakespeare's whose works died a quiet, unheard death.
Yeah, yeah. I always remember saying to my parents how much I wanted to go into professional acting, and them saying to me, "No, it's a very capricious occupation, acting. Go into academia." Which, yeah, yeah.
It's not capricious at all.
No, no.
Definitely not pretentious or snooty. Or,
No, so
no.
no drama school. I went to university instead, but there were also other playwrights of great, highly popular playwrights of Shakespeare's era who like Shakespeare don't appear to have had a university education.
Right.
Ben Jonson, for instance, who was a formidably learned writer. Thomas Dekker, so far as we know, didn't go to university. Henry Shettle, Anthony Mundy. But for me, what I think Shakespeare's background as an actor, that's almost a bit of a superpower for him. I think in many respects, in the Elizabethan period, that puts him ahead of writers such as Robert Greene, because he knows audiences intimately. He knows the very dimensions of various playing spaces. He knows what works and what doesn't work in terms of particular mediums, genres, characters, specific tropes, and so on. But what is quite remarkable is that we don't actually know for certain any specific role that Shakespeare took. So we know he acted in Ben Jonson's plays because the folio, which was actually the first folio edition of a writer's plays during the period, the 1616, the works of Benjamin Jonson tells us so. And we know through Shakespeare's later 1623 first folio that he acted in his own plays. And there are traditions that he played the ghost of Hamlet's father.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And that would have been opposite Richard Burbage, who I imagine, unlike Garrick, probably wasn't wearing a hydraulic wig.
But was nonetheless bombastic with what he did.
but there's also a tradition that Shakespeare played an old man very well, very convincing as an old man.
Really?
Which is the role of Adam in As You Like It. And what I find quite interesting about that is the old man Adam guides the protagonist Orlando into the Forest of Arden. So serves a really important structural purpose, I think. And of course, the ghost of Hamlet's father is the very, very impetus for the tragedy. You don't really have a play of Hamlet unless you have the ghost coming to his son and saying, right, "Revenge my foul and most unnatural murder." So I think they're quite useful roles for a writer who is also in the midst of rehearsal. And we think they only had, say, a few weeks to rehearse some of these plays, right, even what would later become big hitters like Hamlet. So very interesting, I think, considering Shakespeare is an actor who knows his own fellow company members intimately and knows their strengths and limitations.
Well, yeah. When I was teaching, this was something that I had to tell everybody, is that theater is the art of the ensemble. And unfortunately, you hear too many stories about the playwright going to, being involved with like the original production and going, no, that's not what I intended. And you're going, I'm sorry, boss. This is the unspoken contract here.
You've got it wrong.
This is the unspoken contract here. You have given us these words, which we are interpreting.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I think that really speaks to a lot to Shakespeare's ability to see the theatrical art as a whole and be able to develop a more substantial product than. Look, I'm sorry, I don't mean to keep stomping on academia, but I mean, to a degree, there are just some things you can't predict. I remember, I think it was 2013. I just started getting into musicals really heavy, because until then I was just like, I'm not really a big musical guy, but I'm like, oh, there's a wealth of knowledge here that we really should appreciate, because look, I'm going to tell you, the people love them better than anything. So let's figure out what's so exciting. And I'm listening to a lot of these things and I'm like, my God, somebody's going to make a killing if they can make a hip hop musical. And within
Yes.
2 years, you have Hamilton. Nobody
Yes.
saw it coming. They thought it was a joke when Lin-Manuel Miranda first pitched it in like 2009.
Yeah.
And by the end of the first time they heard it, they went, "My God, this is actually kind of impressive."
Yeah.
And so, you can't plan on what sparks of genius are going to add to the canon of drama. You really
Yes.
can't.
Yeah.
Who would have thought Tennessee Williams, this sad, unfortunately, mostly for his life, closeted gay man, could say about the truth of post-war America? He had no idea. No idea. I need to do an episode on him someday. God, that's a funny character.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
okay. I have some questions though, because to my point about academics not being able to predict the future and trying to stick to strict, rigid structures of this is what I've learned, this is the way it goes. Tell me Robert Greene's birth year again.
So his birth year is 1558.
1558.
So Shakespeare's 1564.
Okay. And he got his BA in 1588. Is that what you said?
83.
Robert Greene?
1583.
1583.
His BA was 1580.
Okay.
And his MA was 1583.
So 1583. And he writes this treatise, this pamphlet against Shakespeare on his deathbed in 1592.
Yes.
And I'm assuming died in 1592.
Oh, yes. What I love is, there's a lot of debates about the authorship of that notorious passage in particular, even in its target. But I love that there were also pamphlets circulating at the time that were apparently by Robert Greene, and it was claimed they were written after his death.
Okay.
The zombie Robert Greene as well. So
okay, all right, okay. I'm already seeing this, and pardon if the metaphor doesn't make any sense, but I'm sorry. It kind of seems to me like Robert Greene seems like that era's Dr. Phil. Comes out and says, "I know everything. I've got it down," and then everybody goes, well, you're kind of full of it because you're not really a doctor in the field that you profess that you're not a medical doctor. And here's this guy who's so angry that people are enjoying this great stuff from people. You know what it makes me think of? It makes me think of this last year's Super Bowl halftime show where you have people listening to Kendrick Lamar. This is a current voice in American art. And this is a brilliant voice. And even my sons, they're talking about the origin of Not Like Us. I guess the whole beef between Drake and Kendrick Lamar is Drake said something like, "You're short." And Kendrick's like, "You're going to talk, pedophile?" Okay. But I just remember getting up the next morning in my small rural Western town in America and having everybody go, "Man, I didn't understand nothing of what that boy was saying. I just don't get," and I'm like, yeah, you don't get hip hop. That's all I can say. You don't understand it. So Robert Greene, I'm sorry if you don't understand pop theater. That's all I can say.
Yeah. I think whenever you mention Robert Greene's names at academic conferences, you mention his name and you're often met with judgmental frowns or the odd squirm of the eyebrow. And I think, he's working in professional theatre during a time when he feels that the actors are getting more credit than the writers. So it's really going to ruffle his feathers if these actors are then turning their hands to writing plays themselves. So I think it's a very fascinating period in terms of the professional theatre and the print industry, and it hasn't done Greene any favors whatsoever, that attack on Shakespeare.
Well, but to his credit, I will say, I think for every era there should be a place for criticism, for critique, for a person who is an expert in the art form, who says, "I understand that you like this. Here's why it may or may not be the thing that you think it is."
Yes, yeah. We need more Dr. Phils of the era.
I don't know. I would think a Gene Siskel might be appropriate.
Now, in the 1580s, Green establishes a literary reputation as a writer of pamphlets before turning his hand to also writing plays. And in his first person pamphlet titled The Repentance of Robert Greene, he claims that he married a gentleman's daughter but deserted her when she bore him a child. So he settled in London while she went back to Lincolnshire. So Greene
Ooh.
painting himself as a bit of a git there, really, I think.
Yeah.
And we know he had a son named Fortunatus by a mistress who was the sister of a notorious criminal with the superb name of Cutting Ball.
Gutting ball?
Cutting Ball. And he died. He died in September 1592 at the age of 34. And his son died about a year later. Now,
Right.
Robert Greene had the double misfortune of an infamous death, which was
Oh my
announced by
God.
a literary rival named Gabriel Harvey, who attributed Greene's demise to a surfeit of pickled herring and Rhenish wine.
Oh
So
my
this is a fatal banquet, and I think there's strong insinuations there that Greene's ending mirrored a life of debauchery. And Gabriel Harvey also claimed that Greene was buried in a churchyard near Bedlam on the 4th of September, but no record of this burial has been discovered. And I think it's tempting to try and piece out the imperfections of available documentary evidence through Greene's biographical claims in his pamphlets. But I think Greene had a certain journalistic skill, and some of those pamphlets almost read like early versions of biofiction. So we have to be wary of reading too much in terms of biography into what he claims he did in his pamphlets. In terms of defense, I think Greene's his plays are actually highly entertaining. And I think you get a sense with his drama of visual splendor, and Greene is wonderful in terms of taking advantage of special effects. So you have what we think is his first play, Alphonsus, King of Aragon, and it's got some tremendous staging opportunities. You've got the goddess of love, Venus, descending from the rafters at the beginning of the play.
Okay.
You've got a wooing scene that takes place on a battlefield. So love is a battlefield when it comes to Greene's play. And you've also got a giant brazen head belching forth flames of fire. And you can imagine that for a theatre company, a giant brazen head would be quite an expensive prop, which would necessitate reuse. And Robert Greene does reuse the giant brazen head in Friar Bacon and Friar Bungay, which is a Magus play. So this is a play where you've got two wizards at one point have a magical duel. They whip their wands out and everything. This is long before Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings came on the scene.
Right.
And you've also got a collaboration with another writer named Thomas Lodge called A Looking Glass for London and England. And in that play, you see characters getting struck by lightning bolts or swallowed by fire. You've got the biblical figure of Jonah is swallowed by a whale. And this doesn't seem to have been the first biblical play that Robert Greene wrote. So he also wrote a play called The History of Job. And that play title appears in a list of manuscripts that were supposedly lost when the antiquarian John Warburton's cook, Betsy Baker, used these precious pages as pie dish linings. So just Greene's luck, I think. But I think in so many respects, Greene paves the way for later plays. So he also writes a play called The Scottish History of James IV, which, despite its title, really isn't a history play. It's something of a romance where you have James IV orders the assassination of his wife Dorothea because he's fallen for another woman. So Dorothea has to disguise herself, leave the court, but this is a comedy. So at the end of comedies during the period, you've got a sense of reunion, and James and Dorothea are reunited. They're brought back together, and on the surface, all's well ends well.
Right, right.
But you have to ask, what is a sequel to that play going to look like?
Oh,
and I
boy.
think in that respect, you've got these darker endings in Green's works that look forward to some of Shakespeare's problematic plays, like Measure for Measure.
Yeah.
These plays that they're ticking the boxes in terms of genre, but if you leave the theatre and start questioning the ending, well, you're left with quite a few questions, I think.
Yeah, I mean, are we okay with the ending of Merchant of Venice and what happens to Shylock? Well, I guess he got some new stockings at least. Okay, I want to go back to this, and I think we need to talk about somebody else here pretty soon. But with these plays, I mean, Jonah being swallowed by a whale. I mean, these grandiose things, this brazen heads, vomiting fire. In performance, are these supposed to happen on stage? Because I know a lot of time they'd say off stage, "Oh, Jonah's been swallowed," and rely upon the performance to sell that story. Is that what happened here, or
yes,
did they have?
Yes, I think so. I mean, you have some scholars say that Green often imagines certain stage business that might not be possible in reality, but actually, I think they did stage these things, that you had pyrotechnics, you had fireworks, you had a prop known as a hell mouth, which could represent the mouth of the whale, for instance.
That's precisely what I was thinking. I'm like, here's somebody who's coming specifically from university. The last era of theater that was coming before them was the medieval era, in which he probably had these things, and he just went, well, this is what theater is all about, not thinking that he's at the cusp of a brand new theatrical era.
But that's a wonderful point, Owen, actually, is that you do have performances taking place at university, and they've got budgets, so they've got gods and goddesses descending from the rafters. And I think the likes of Robert Greene, they're taking what they've learned from university drama and they're bringing it to the London commercial stages.
Right. And that's another thing of, here academic is going, I don't understand why people don't listen to more Mozart. Because I'm sorry, everybody thinks Luke Bryan currently is a lot more entertaining. That's all I can say. Oh my gosh, Robert Greene, you poor fella. Okay, amazing. Man, that Robert Greene. I go back and forth on Greene. As critical as he was of up-and-coming talent, his work also has to be respected and admired for its contributions to what we have from the British Renaissance today. But it sure is easy to picture him with his nose in the air and a well-earned harumph right on the tip of his tongue. Anyway, while we're at this interval, if you just can't wait anymore, I'll suggest that you right now order your copy of Darren's book, Shakespeare's Borrowed Feathers, using the links in the show notes. But speaking of Dr. Darren Freebury-Jones, let's get back to him and the other two dramatists he brought to this episode. Darren, who else you got?
I got next up on my list is John Lilly.
Huh. Okay.
Have we come across Lilly before?
I can recall in quizzes in college when they'd say list at least 5 contemporaries of Shakespeare, and this is one of those names that you'd memorize in case this question came up, and you'd have to write it down as one of the 5 contemporaries.
I like it. That's good. It's a pretty memorable name, isn't it? Lily, what you will.
Absolutely. You're just like, okay, that's another one.
So John Lilly, he's older again. So he is born in 1554. And he was in pretty distinguished familial company. So his grandfather, William, as author of the most widely used Latin grammar textbook in England, and his uncle George was a cartographer responsible for an important map of the British Isles. So Lily
Really?
went to really, I mean, that's wonderful. Familiar company, I think.
Right, right.
And a bit like Robert Greene, Lilly is a university educated playwright. So he was
Okay.
educated at Oxford. He got his MA in 1575, and he took another MA at Cambridge in 1579. And then
Huh.
he moves to London, and he follows in his family's writerly footsteps and achieves literary fame with the publication of two prose romances, Euphues, The Anatomy of Wit, and Euphues and His England. And the style of English prose in these works was hugely influential and was known as
Mhm.
Euphuism. So Lillian's stylistic tropes include a self-conscious approach to language, corresponding structures and a series of clauses, as well as references to mythology and nature. So John Lilly really revolutionizes English prose, and then
Right.
he embarks on a dramatic writing career. And unlike Robert Greene and unlike Shakespeare, most of his plays were performed before the Queen, and they were performed by
Ah.
a children's company, the Children of Paul's. And unlike practically every other playwright of the period, Lilly doesn't seem to have co-authored any plays, nor written with the more common stages in mind. And there's a line I love in the prologue to his play Sappho and Phao, where John Lilly wishes audiences would content themselves with soft smiling, not loud laughing during his comedies.
Hmm.
So these plays, they usually perform privately for Queen Elizabeth I, and
Mhm.
he actually sat on her last four parliaments as an MP. And Lilly was very keen to become master of the revels, which would mean he could oversee court entertainments and censor plays. But to his
Right.
grave disappointment, his petitions to the Queen were in vain, and he spent the final years of his life at his wife's home in Yorkshire before dying of unknown causes in 1606. So that's
Oh,
Lilly's
wow.
biography, bounded in a nutshell.
Mhm.
And Lilly was one of the playwrights about whom I knew fairly little when I started writing Shakespeare's Borrowed Feathers. And I thought, well, he's a writer of comedies. So I thought, light-hearted entertainment.
Mhm.
And I was surprised that Lilly actually really pushes against genre. So
Huh.
his one play, Campaspe, in which the king of the Macedonians falls in love with Campaspia, a Greek captive, but finds
Okay.
competition for her affections in a portrait painter. That play is described as both a comedy and a tragical comedy in its printed text. And I think you can also see Lilly's reluctance to pigeonhole his plays into specific genres in the prologue to his drama Endymion, where
Huh.
Lilly has his prologue say that it is neither comedy, nor tragedy, nor story, nor anything. So Lilly's actually very, very hard to pin down, and a really innovative playwright, and so many elements of Shakespeare's comedies can be traced to Lilly. So cross-dressing heroines, the use
Yeah.
of song, battles of wit.
Kind of sounds like Kurt Vonnegut in a way. Like, I don't know how to write a book. I just write. And then, yeah, beginning, middle, and end. What? Anyway, that's fascinating. I mean, that's somebody, though, who's going, we are at the beginning of a new era, and I'm just going
Yes.
to write and we'll throw it against a wall, see what sticks.
Yeah. And that really surprised me when I was looking at dramatists of the 1580s, that I thought things would be quite compartmentalized in terms of genre. You've got
Right.
your tragedies, you've got your comedies, you've
Mm-hmm.
got your histories. And I thought, well, maybe genres developed during the Jacobean period. You start mingling genres. You suddenly have tragic comedy, but that's really not the case. That these dramatists, the likes of Robert Greene, the likes of John Lilly, they were incredibly experimental, and they were conflating genres and really playing around with things, I think, and
Right.
just putting these tropes, these conventions in an aggressive cocktail shaker, I think.
Well, I want to go back to what you were saying about his kind of wag of the finger to the audience before the show of please don't laugh, just smile a little
Yes.
bit if you can.
Yes.
I've done an episode on this before about theater audience etiquette.
Yes.
It's so interesting to me, the difference of etiquette in audience response from America to Britain and probably other European audiences as well. America, we're trained, if you enjoy something, applaud for it, hoot for it. Let's do it. In Britain, you're kind of trained. You might titter a little bit if something is funny, but you wait until the lights go out to applaud for anything.
Yes.
You know, if a line is delivered amazing, sit there, stew in it, enjoy it. And then at the end of the scene, you can give them their due. And I've actually seen that affect writing to a degree. My son and I recently went to a musical. I'm not going to say the name of it, but I could tell it was funny. There was almost a fundamental misunderstanding of kind of the history behind it, but I watched it and I went, oh, this musical was absolutely written for a British audience because because if you look at American musicals, a lot of American musicals have a great button at the end where you're like, this is definitely the end of the song. This is definitely where we should get some applause. This is it. And most of the songs in this one just kind of trailed off into the ether and got interrupted by dialogue right at the end of the song. So the audience didn't have an opportunity to applaud.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, I don't think it was a wise choice. I mean, both my son and I, he's getting quite adept at this. We were both going, that didn't really make any sense. Like, I really wanted to appreciate that song for a moment. It needed a moment to sit with me and live. And instead, we're just going to go on with the play now.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's very, very interesting to me.
No, it's fascinating that you're getting a sense of a writer adapting to the rhythm of a specific audience. And
right.
Yeah, just cutting off those opportunities for laughter. But I think theatre etiquette in Shakespeare's time would have been quite different to theatre etiquette in Britain today.
Oh yeah, I mean you're starting an entire new era of theater, and I mean, as we kind of mentioned before, I was going to make mention of this. Your groundlings are there for 3 to 4 hours, and they are not sitting comfortably. They are standing the entire time. I remember when I would used to lecture as well. I mean, after an hour, I'm just going, my legs are killing me.
Oh yeah. I'll give a talk in Stratford. And I'll limp out of the building.
Right. And these people are there for 4 hours on their feet for entertainment. This is their recreation.
Yes. So you better entertain them. And an anecdote that often springs to my mind when I think of early modern audiences was there was a production of Hamlet in Stratford-upon-Avon in 1965, and you had the actor David Warner delivering one of Hamlet's great soliloquies and turning to the audience and asking the question, "Am I a coward?" And he was very surprised to receive an answer from an audience member in the affirmative. And I think, when you have Richard Burbage, the original Hamlet, he might have been less surprised to receive an answer. I think audiences during Shakespeare's time can be rowdily dialogic, but you get the sense with Lilly, he's writing for a quite different audience. And if he had public audiences attending his plays, you can imagine them laughing and Lily simply saying, "Stop it."
Right. There's that. And then there's the idea that a play defies a genre. That's very interesting to me, that he's specifically saying, look, it's not any of the things you want it to be. I can't remember what it was. It was the Dune sequel. My younger son and I are huge fans of that franchise. But my partner and my older son saw the first movie and they're like, this is really long and it drags on. And there's so much you have to learn in order for it to actually happen that my younger son and I, we went to see the sequel by ourselves because we usually would all forego. And we came back and I remember being in shock and awe at the end of that thing. Like I'm leaning over on the seat in front of me. I mean, my head is in my hands, and my son is going, Dad, are you okay? I'm like, that was so much movie. It was everything. It was a love story. It was a riveting action war epic. It was a religious epic, a story about family and interpersonal dramas. But then you start thinking about the scale of it. And you're like, the stuff that they just did here affects a galaxy.
Mm, mm.
So it would almost be better to maybe say, I honestly don't know what this is. I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, but I love that phrase you used there where you were saying that the stuff that they do affects a galaxy because
Mhm.
all drama thrives on conflict, and a lot
Right.
of the conflict in Lily's plays is actually between gods. And
Right.
another thing I love about Lily as well is he's quite meta. So he's quite meta theatrical that he's got these young boys playing all of his roles. So you get a lot of cross-dressing heroines. You have a play like Galatea, he writes, for instance, where the two heroines of that play disguise themselves as boys and fall in love without realizing they're both female. And then Venus transforms one of them into a boy so that they can marry, although we never learn who. So this is paving the way for the likes of Rosalind and As You Like It, Portia in The
Right.
Merchant of Venice. And in terms of
Right.
being quite meta, Lily likes to refer to his plays as dreams or as shadows. And of course, this is something Shakespeare takes up in A Midsummer Night's Dream. If we
Yeah.
shadows have offended, as Puck puts it. So I think without John Lilly, we wouldn't have Shakespeare's comedies, certainly not in the form we know them today. So he's an incredibly
Right.
important playwright, and that's why I've added him to my list because I think he's
Yeah.
he's worth getting to know better. And I found it completely joyous getting to know Lily a bit better writing this book.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you talk about people switching gender roles, and I was just thinking of like the history of that. I'm writing an episode coming up about a famous female impersonator, and I think of that in like ancient Roman comedies. They used to parody that all the time.
Yes.
Just a man dressing as a woman was funny. That was just it.
Yeah.
But then you get to when Shakespeare's writing Rosalind, and who is it in Merchant of Venice? Is it Jessica?
Portia.
Portia, that's right.
Oh no,
Um,
Jessica as well. She disguises
yeah,
herself as a boy to escape from Shylock's house. Yeah.
right, right. And there, it's a device. It's a tool.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
it propels the story forward in a way. And I actually just recorded another episode on when Kate Blanchett did that play for the National several years ago, and there was a moment where they gender swapped, and it was so much easier for the woman to do it and be believable. And when the man did it, this was also a directorial choice. It was low key kind of offensive because they're like, well, a man's perception of a woman is basically this caricature. So that's that's very interesting to me. That here's the guy who started just getting the idea that the gender role reversal could actually be used to expose some greater truth in the world. That's wow,
Oh yeah.
fascinating.
No, check out Lily after this episode, Aaron. He's a
Yeah,
joy, honestly.
yeah, absolutely. Wow,
Right,
wow.
I've got one more
All
playwright
right, yeah, let's
lined up
go.
for you, and he's another. There seems to be a pattern here. He's another university educated playwright. He's older than Shakespeare. My next playwright is George Peele. So George Peele was baptized in London in 1556.
Oh,
And
okay.
in 1571, he enters what would later become Pembroke College, Oxford. And 3 years later, he removed to Christ Church. And it was here that George Peele first turned his hand to dramatic writing, which was a translation of a play by your very own Euripides.
Hey, at least he wasn't shying away and saying like, "No, I don't know where I got this from."
But
That's
he
great.
got his BA in 1577, and his MA followed a couple of years later. And alongside writing for the commercial stage in London, Peel was quite interesting because he followed in his father's footsteps by contributing to Lord Mayor's shows. And Peel was entrusted with the arrangement of 2 Latin plays at Christ Church, even though he'd left the college several years earlier. So
Oh.
George Peel, he comes across as this courtly poet, a writer of pageants and plays, but he died in poverty in 1596. And the cause of his death was the pox, according to one testimony. Now, buckle up, right? Peel's reputation, wait for this. So Peel's got this reputation as a formidable poet and scholar, but this gives way to a reputation for waywardness. So there's one story, Aaron, in circulation that really tickles me and probably says a lot for my childish sense of humor. So this
we all come back to it. We all come back to it. The man who named this podcast, Tom Empey, always used to point out everything that was phallic, even into his 60s. It was like, it looks like
Yes, it's not quite phallic. Scatological, I think, is the right word.
Oh, so, even better.
So there's an anecdote, right, that has George Peel attending a posh dinner and insulting a witty gentlewoman who was sitting next to him. So when the lady leaned forward at the table, Peel apparently let out a huge fart, roaring the eyes and flaring the nostrils of all other dinner guests. And Peel nudged the lady in her side and reassured her in a loud voice, "Don't worry, love, I'll say I was responsible."
Yeah. Oh my. That is fantastic. That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
If you read Peel's works, I think he's a tremendous talent. He's very eclectic, but he comes across as quite stiff, quite formal. And this anecdote just suggests a very different figure to the one I imagine whenever I read Peel. And we don't know if there's any veracity to it. There were lots of jesting accounts attached to your sort of celebrity figures during the period, but I think these tales give a picture of Elizabethan playwrights who worked hard, but played pretty hard as well.
Well, I mean, I think of it a little bit in relation to how you have all of these great trained actors today who are getting a lot of, especially British actors, who are getting a lot of street cred and notoriety, and not just notoriety, but they're getting fame. I guess I'll say that. And then you find out they're amazing impressionists. You've got people like Tom Hiddleston who can bring you to tears with his Coriolanus, and you've got Benedict Cumberbatch who can I just saw a tiny clip of him being the creature from the National's Frankenstein several years ago. And just the brilliance he brings to that role, in any role, frankly. And then you find out he goes on talk shows and does these horrific body impressions of people, and Tom Hiddleston too. And okay, so you're not as serious as you seem to always be. We're expecting these people to, once they leave, they're like, well, I will go watch a tennis match. And
I think when it comes to George Peel, it's a case of don't read a play by the title page.
Right.
And he's a very eclectic writer. So he, a bit like Robert Greene, and a bit like Lily, I guess. He writes in a variety of genres. He embraces hybrid dramatic forms with widespread arms. So his canon consists of a pastoral play, The Arraignment of Paris. You've got a play called The Battle of Alcazar, which is a feast of violence and bombast. You've got another biblical play, a bit like Green and Lodge's A Looking Glass for London and England, called David and Bathsheba. And you've got a couple of history plays from Peele as well, such as Edward I and The Troublesome Reign of King John. And he also writes a comic romance called The Old Wife's Tale. And I think in many respects, Peele really paves the way for Shakespeare's history plays. This was a hugely popular genre, and Shakespeare loved a Henry. You've got your Henry IV, Henry V, Henry VI. You've also got your Richard II, Richard III, Henry VIII. I might add. So you've got
six, part 1, 2, and 3. Yeah,
part what is a trilogy? Yes, which I always like to refer to as the Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Shakespeare canon.
God.
Minus the dragons and the disappointing season finale.
The one summer I did Shakespeare in the Park in Seattle, I was in Midsummer Night's Dream. I was Demetrius, but the company
I've played that role.
There we go. The company I ran with, though, did 2 Shakespearean pieces, not necessarily back to back, but they would have 2 running in parks at all time. And you knew it was the same company. So the other one that was running on the nights that we weren't was a big chopped up version of Henry VI, all 3 of them.
Oh, yeah.
And it took them about 3.5 hours to do. Each one of those is a good 3-hour play in and of itself. But I remember just sitting there watching, I'm like, my God, what's the body count at this point? You know?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, you've got Peele kind of like giving something of a format, like an early format to these, huh?
Yeah, these are some of the earliest history plays. Edward I, The Troublesome Reign of King John. They're quite jingoistic, but I think Peele recognizes the opportunities for writing these quite nationalistic plays, dramatizing English history, but also blending them with motifs more commonly associated with Roman tragedy. And with The Troublesome Reign of King John, there's good evidence that when Shakespeare writes his King John play several years later, he's got the first quarto of George Peele's play at his elbow, because Shakespeare follows it remarkably closely in terms of structure. He also duplicates stage directions from Peele's play. And I like to imagine Shakespeare as something of a modern screenwriter there, where he's been asked to commission a remake from this older hits from a now defunct studio. But Peele is particularly important in terms of the narrative of my book, because he is arguably Shakespeare's first co-author.
Oh, really?
So Peele is now recognized as Shakespeare's collaborator on a play that I have a peculiar soft spot for. And I think we mentioned it earlier, and you were just talking about body counts. Titus Andronicus.
Oh, no kidding.
It's the record holder for body counts in the Shakespeare canon.
Oh, yeah.
14 deaths in total.
Yeah.
So you've got this more experienced, older, university-educated playwright. We think he's responsible for a few of the opening scenes and maybe a scene later in the play. So for me, I think you're seeing Shakespeare being guided by this older contemporary right at the beginning of his career. And Titus Andronicus, I mean, it's bonkers, isn't it? I like to call it the Quentin Tarantino movie of the Shakespeare canon. It's got decapitation, mutilation,
hands being cut off, tongues being cut out, and eat your kids.
And a mother being tricked into eating her own son who'd been baked in a pie. Yeah, eat your kids. Yeah.
Well, and the Anthony Hopkins version that Julie Taymor directed,
yes.
Say what you want about it, love it or hate it, but I'll never forget Jessica Lange getting like a whole pie server stuffed down her throat.
Oh no. For me, that is one of the greatest film adaptations of Shakespeare period.
Good
Julie
Lord.
Taymor, 1999 Titus Andronicus. I think it's fantastic. And I think it's it's a fabulous play in its own right. It sets the format for so many of Shakespeare's later plays in terms of its exploration of revenge, of madness, of family dynamics in
Mhm.
the midst of the political sphere as well. And I think it's also a highly entertaining play. But then I'm a big fan of the horror genre.
Yeah. Okay. I'm too. I'm too. And well, and I think about it in terms of how sensitive people today, and probably rightly so, get very protective of copyright.
Mm.
Whereas it shocks people today to find out something like, wait, Hamlet didn't just come from Shakespeare's brain. No, he
Mm.
saw it like 6 years earlier and he just rewrote
Mm.
it. And I did that whole episode on Shakespeare adapted, and um,
Yes.
yeah, I went back and watched that movie, The Northman, and I went, okay, I see how that is a Hamlet story. But it is kind of interesting to me that there must have been a kind of a master and apprentice understanding there of, I'm going to show you some of the ropes, you take the rest of it from here, and we'll see what we come up with.
And that's what you often find is collaboration was commonplace during the period,
Hmm.
co-authorship, and you do often have the more experienced playwright will just get the wheels in motion with
Yeah.
regards to writing the early scenes, and they might contribute later in the play as well. But you make a great point about copyright as well, is that things were quite different in Shakespeare's time. There's
Yeah.
a real emphasis in the Elizabethan education system on imitatio, on imitation.
Hmm.
Imitation is actually praised, provided it's combined with inventio, so inventiveness as well. So
Yeah.
adapting plays, that's perfectly normal during the period. There's an awful lot of duplication going on as well. This is a business operation. So if you've got a hit on, say, Richard III in this playhouse over here, don't be surprised if several months later another Richard III play crops up by a rival playing company. And
Right.
that's what I mean when I say it's really worth stressing that this is a commercial operation, that these plays are fundamentally designed to entertain audiences.
Well, and help me solve something here because I feel like I've heard this. I don't know if I've completely nailed it down, but a lot of these plays were written for a specific company in a specific playhouse. So once
Mm.
they're written, it's just to be done by that company from then on.
Yeah, the plays are written for specific companies, and Shakespeare largely sticks with the same company
Hmm.
throughout his career, whereas other dramatists are working freelance. They're jumping from company to company. But yes, they're commissioned to write a play by a particular company, and later that play might migrate to other companies. But they're working with theatre managers, and they're
Right.
working closely with them.
Right. Wow. Okay. Fascinating. Like it it kind of busts open a whole thing for me about the ideas of competition and collaboration.
Mm.
You know, I mean, yes, obviously these companies are all trying to get people to come see their plays in their houses and collect that income. But you've also got people who are just like, I don't care what house it goes to. This idea just needs to be out there. I want to help people get their start, which is very interesting. I mean, especially now, can you tell me this? Let's just take Titus Andronicus, for example. Would George Peele have had any commercial gain for this?
Yes, what he would have been paid for his
Okay.
contributions to the play. Yeah.
So it doesn't matter. He's just like, I don't care where it goes. Just get out there and do it.
Yeah.
Really?
Well, once you submit your manuscript to a playing company, it then belongs to that playing company. So the
Hmm.
owners have the authors have no real rights over them. So this is very much transactional. This is very much a job that you're submitting your play, and then the actors will do what they will with it. It's a bit different in Shakespeare's case, of course, because
Hmm.
he is then acting in his own plays, and I
Right.
think that distinguishes Shakespeare from several contemporary playwrights, is that first-hand lived experience of not only writing the plays, but also performing in them, and also having a stake in the playhouses. He's a shareholder at the Globe Playhouse from 1599, and then the indoor Blackfriars Theatre from 1608 onwards. But all of this is to say that, yes, playmaking and playwriting, it's very much a business operation.
Right. And that's something that, I stressed this throughout the pandemic, where you'd have people who would, they'd criticize the arts for basically existing, I think. And I'm like, okay, tell me what you did during the pandemic. Okay. Not everybody, learned the violin. Not everybody understood after that how to create a vegetable garden. Not everybody is, now fluent in Cantonese. Okay. I've got a whole shelf of comic books over here that I have just started to reread, and probably having read maybe 60% of them. And I am just now like, this is opening a whole new avenue of thought to me of how these things were written. But during the pandemic, how much did you binge watch? How much did you binge listen? Did you actually read any books, or were they read to you? The arts have an absolute place and an absolute value in our society. It's not just purely entertainment. It is the stuff that speaks to your soul. And these guys, they're figuring out how to make a buck off it.
Soul of the age. Absolutely. Yeah. And I love the comparison to the pandemic, because, in that respect, the world of Shakespeare doesn't seem so distant to 2020, 2021, where you had these frequent plague outbreaks.
Right.
That's Shakespeare's opportunity when he's in lockdown to write narrative poems like Venus and Adonis, or maybe get to work on King Lear. Maybe he'd been planning that play for many years, and he thinks, right, here we go. We've got a pandemic. This is time to buckle down, Bill, and write that one.
How about I knock out 114 sonnets today? Oh man, that's fantastic. And which one did you say actually died from the pox of the three we just talked about?
That was George Peele.
George Peele.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Darren Freebury-Jones, thank you for this stuff. You have several more. We just got a taste. We just got the frosting on the cake in some respects of what's in the book. There are plenty more, including one of your favorite Shakespearean artists who I've done an episode on, Sir Thomas Kidd, or Mr. Thomas Kidd. Oh, and
certainly not Sir Thomas. Yes.
No, certainly not. But the poor, let's just talk about a guy who was terrible at picking roommates. That's about all I can say about him.
I mean, Christopher Marlowe, great poet, great playwright. You wouldn't want to be roomies with him, and
I don't even want to know him. I don't want to know Christopher Marlowe. Like, that would be the guy if the cops came asking. I just slowly shut the door. No, sorry.
But that's what you get. That's what you get with Thomas Kidd's letters. Is that He's saying that Marlowe, he's an atheist, and it doesn't paint a particularly nice picture of Thomas Kidd, but you think, he's potentially facing torture in the Tower of London, that you have the Privy Council, they're accusing Christopher Marlowe of writing a xenophobic poem, and they search their chambers, they find some documentation that they consider to be atheistic, and poor Thomas Kidd just gets dragged into Marlowe's tragedy.
Right.
And then Christopher Marlowe goes and gets stabbed above the right eye in a house in Deptford, and apparently died swearing, which is how I would like to go up, I think.
Well, I hear that the thing that most people say right before death, other than Jesus Christ, is a scatological reference. So, all right. But beyond the book, Shakespeare's Bar of the Feathers, you also have one on Thomas Kidd. That's pretty fascinating. But yeah, awesome. I hope we have you on the show again. I'd love to have you.
That'd be lovely. And yes, so much more to talk about, and so many more playwrights explored in the book. And it's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege. And it's just wonderful to meet you, Aaron.
Awesome. Thank you.
Avanta.
genre bending, and fart jokes? Who knew we had so much in common with Shakespeare's contemporaries? And like we've been saying, Darren's book covers several more dramatists who all helped foster Shakespeare's works into the volumes we have today. And I want to thank Dr. Darren Freebury-Jones for his contributions to this episode, and if you haven't done so yet, make sure to get your copy of his book, Shakespeare's Borrowed Feathers. Again, links to where the book can be purchased are in the show notes. But for now, I'll sign off. This has been another episode of Euripides Eumenides, a theater history podcast. I've been your host, Aaron Odom. Another episode will be in your ears in a fortnight, and I will see you at intermission.